Welcome to the Hunt Test Hobo podcast, your place for truckside chats and insights into the retriever game. Whether you're just getting started or you're a seasoned handler, this podcast is another resource for tips, tricks, and insights from both the amateurs and professional trainers' perspectives. Each week, we'll dive into the nitty-gritty of retriever training, sharing stories of success, overcoming challenges, and forging stronger bonds with our dogs. This is the Hunt Test Hobo podcast. I'm Chris Rud, your host, fellow retriever enthusiast, and student of the game. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Hunt Test Hobo podcast. It's going to be another great episode. Today I'm with Jeremy Legge of Hickory Hills Retrievers. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. I should get that right because I've only my only reason I'm even sitting here doing the podcast is because he sold me a dog, but we'll talk more about that later. But I'm really happy to have Jeremy on, and we'll talk a little bit about his history in the game. Our primary conversation is going to be around prepping for the Grand, which ironically both of us aren't running this year, and we'll get into why that is, but it'll be a great conversation. But like I talked about in the last episode, at the beginning of each episode, I'm going to take a moment and just give a gear recommendation or a gear review. Like I said, in the first time I did this, I'm not sponsored by anybody but the Hunt Test Guide. So this is literally just me trying to help people know more about types of equipment. We did bumpers last time because I was surprised, but I got quite a few questions about what type of bumpers I use. This one, I'm going to do e-collars. Now, I'll say this off the bat. I know that there's three primarily really good e-collars. I've used two of them relatively extensively. I primarily use the Dogdra Edge RT. It's a nice big stick. It's nice ergonomics. I like to handle it. And it gives me a bunch of different control. Mostly, honestly, I like it because I can slide it into my back pocket really easily, and I can still hit the button quick if I need to. And it also has continuous and nick functions, but the nice thing is it has two buttons for each, and you can give a light nick for the lower button, a medium nick for the higher button. If you push them both together, it gives you an even higher nick. And that same is with continuous, and I found that that's, when I train puppies or just different dogs that I have, it makes it really easy for me to know what type of level of correction I'm given, and I like it. So, and I didn't plan this, but I know that after talking with Jeremy, it's what he uses. So, I'm curious why you like it.
It was similar to, the initial color I used was Tritronics. So it was the most similar to it I felt once everything went to Garmin. And I didn't really like the Garmin changes, so I switched to Dogtra. And
Cool.
It's been good. All the same reasons that you're talking about.
Yeah. The other color I do use is when I go hunting, because I don't like to have the big stick, as I call it. For when I go hunting, I have the Garmin Sport collar. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but I've had nothing but that's been a great collar as well. And I know that Dan and Tyler at Green Acres or Gun Dog Success also use that. So those are two great collars. I know that Sport Dog stopped making their bigger version, their retriever version. And so I've had a couple people reach out and ask me which one I'm using. So that's why I just wanted to give that recommendation. I like it because I can separate out the continuous and the nick function. Some people like to just use continuous the whole time and just use it as a nick, but I like it to have both. So anyway, that's your free gear review to kick off the podcast today. So now that we're through that, so Jeremy, I would love for people to get to know you a little bit more. Why don't you tell me and the listeners how you got into the retriever game?
So my father-in-law took me duck hunting back in 2003, 2004. And I fell in love with waterfowl hunting, and we weren't using a dog. And I was actually getting ready to go off to chiropractic school and got married right then. and we wanted a dog. I said, well, we're getting a lab, and I'm going to figure out how to make a duck dog. And it kind of started there. So on my breaks during chiropractic school, stress relief was trying to figure out how to train a dog. And there were guys there that were duck hunters, and they showed me some things, and I read books and learned as much as I could. And then I ended up graduating from chiropractic school, moved back to my hometown, and Steve Eric was training 45 minutes away, and I literally would go throw birds for him 2 times a week on my half days in the office, and take a shower at my mom's on the way to work. And that's how I started learning a lot. So that's how it started, and it's blown up.
Yeah, so you're a pro, but kind of a different type of pro, I'd have to say.
Yeah, definitely. So,
and that's because, in my mind, because you have like a couple other. Well, you have is chiropractic work your main work, you'd say, or
yeah. So I run a pretty decent sized clinic that has chiropractors, physical therapists, a medical doctor in there, all of us practicing under one roof, mainly doing treating musculoskeletal stuff, and then doing some functional medicine, regenerative medicine things in the office. And that's definitely my main income. That's what feeds the kids and keeps a roof over our head. The dog game in the kennel has gotten bigger than I thought it would be, and it's just a good balance for me to have an outdoor activity like that and decompress from dealing with human beings every day. So it's good for me. So,
yeah.
And I've found a good balance here. There's a team of people around me now. I've got a client slash person that takes care of my kennels for me at 4 to 5 nights a week. And Bo Schweitzer is actually helping me out a lot for this Grand specifically, because I'm not going to be running it because we have our 3rd kid on the way. And I think it's going to turn into him doing some young dog stuff for me, so I can focus on mainly running Grands, SRS events, and quals here and there. So
Yeah. Well, cool. Speaking of quals, you had a pretty good weekend this weekend, right?
that was good. Yeah. We got Toby got the win and won, and I finished the other qual with my personal dog Fern. Yeah.
Very cool. And so the other thing that I've always wanted to do is I've wanted to go to Cincinnati and actually eat at your restaurant as well, but I haven't figured out how to make it work because I don't know, like most of the time because I'm leaving, it's like later on Sundays and I don't think it's open. But at some point, I want to go to the restaurant with a logo that's got a lab and a little girl running a dog. So.
Yeah, and that doesn't take up a lot of my time. That was mainly an investment, and we're just silent partners in the deal. But yeah, it's a nice place for sure.
Yeah, well, it's owned by dog people, so hopefully the food is good because I'm sure it is. But anyway, the other thing that I think is really really cool is I don't know. I mean, you've had a lot of really successful dogs. A lot of females that have been really successful. You've had, is it 2 dogs or 3 dogs on the top producer list for the female side?
2, Ellie and Piper.
Yeah. And for those that don't know, Piper is Winter's mom. You guys obviously have heard me talk about Winter a lot in the podcast, but Jeremy sold me the dog, surprised me, but I'm very happy that he did and turned out great. So
that was good.
It was good. So, all right, let's jump into the Grand stuff. So Jeremy and I talked a little bit ahead of time, and we came up with 10 things to work on prior to running the Grand. I've also got a lot of people message me and ask me, hey, what are a few things that I should be working on? This is my first Grand. So I thought it would be pretty good to do an episode just specifically on things to do to prep for the Grand. And I wanted to be clear, I'm not talking about things that you're doing pre-Grand training. You've probably heard on my podcast and other people's podcasts, the week before the Grand or the week before any major event is really just about the dogs getting comfortable to the routines, getting comfortable to being at the new environment, for me, when I go to the spring grand, I'm going from potentially snow to 80-degree days. So it's really about getting them comfortable with the environment, with the, all the new smells, as well as the group training atmosphere. I think does do a lot about just getting the opportunities to get those little tiny corrections to help the dogs realize, like, hey, doesn't matter how many people are out here, doesn't matter that there's a bunch of trailers and dogs yelping and doing all that. Like, you still got to sit, and you got to be a very controlled, compliant dog, because the Grand, in my opinion, has the highest standard of line manners of any event that is ran in the dog game. And so it's really important that you work on that. And that's talked about so much in other podcasts that I've done and other podcasts out there in the retriever game that we're not going to spend a lot of time on that. That's not something that you're going to fix right before the test, but you definitely can implement the tools that you've already built into the dog to help them realize that they got to sit compliantly, because the Grand is the hardest, or has the highest standard for line manners of any dog game that I know of. So, Jeremy, you ready to go through the list?
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So these aren't in any particular order. They were just in our flow of consciousness. We made independent lists, and I think 6 or 7 were identical. So thought that was pretty good that we were pretty much on the same page. So number 1 is down the shore blinds. So, yep. Jeremy, you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I just feel like it's a good training tool to prepare you for the Grand. I mean, we go to the Grand, there's times that the water blinds are up the gut, but more times than not, you're going to run into something where you're going to have to be down the shore, whether it's in the beginning of the blind, the whole part of the blind, or at the end of the blind. And you got to have a dog that's comfortable swimming in water or running in water. It's even harder, I feel like, on a shoreline blind when they're running, because they have a little more control and definitely more fast pace. Plus, they're in running water, so it's harder for them to hear. So, I mean, it's something I'm doing pretty regularly, from 2 months to before all the way up to it. I mean, I guarantee it. The last 2 blinds I run before we go into battle at the Grand is a shoreline blind or 2. So,
yep.
And you got to balance it out. You want to do it on both sides. You got dogs that swing different ways, and you've got to make sure you got balance with that.
Yep. And the thing that I always make sure I do that when I am working on down the shore blind is that I'm making sure that I make at least 1 or 2 casts towards the shore, because the mind shift of a dog that thinks like, okay, I got to stay in the water because I need to stay in the water, is one thing, because they've been taught to stay in that water. But as soon as you cast towards the shore and they think, okay, thank goodness I can get out, at least that's what I think that's going through their mind, then you're saying, okay, nope, actually you're staying in the water, and then you're either putting them back into water or you're just casting them away from the shore. I think that if you don't, I guess the summary of what I'm saying is make sure that you are over challenging the blind and actually putting your dog deep into that hard suction and making sure that you're practicing getting out of it, especially for prepping for the Grand.
I think what I see people do, I mean, and our training group has gotten pretty big for the Grand, and it's not about letting that dog have a great blind unless it's one that doesn't have the confidence yet. But most of the time, if I have a dog, I'm running a shoreline blind, and they're wanting to go out to sea, and let's just say they're on line, but I can tell that they want to be in the water, I'm going to put them on land. All right. I'm going to make sure I can get them on land and back off of it. So when I'm training and running any blinds, I'm trying to figure out where that dog doesn't want to go, and I'm trying to put them there. I want control over them, and they've got to go where I tell them, not just where they want to go.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I'll say that was the biggest eye-opener to me when I ran my first couple Grands, was just how much, to me, and I don't know if I truly believe this anymore, because I have had some harder marks in water, but at least the majority of the tests that I've ran at the Grand, the water test, it's normally about the blind. the blind is the big part of it. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of times that there's key birds that are really hard in water. But I just think that in general, that's what I've seen. Could be my opinion could be completely wrong. I'm just saying that's my perspective on what I've seen from the water test at the Grand.
You got to do both. There's 12. We got to pick up at least 11 marks clean.
Yep.
And you only have 4 blinds to run, but the Grand, they're judging those blinds harder than anybody else does. So.
Yep. All right, number 2. Make sure your dog can really swing with the gun, and not freak out if that bird doesn't come right away. I think that's a key thing, because sometimes there's delays, and sometimes they don't see it right away. And if you get a dog that bugs really bad, it could be a problem. So, anything you want to add to make sure you're swinging with the gun good?
No, other than like I'll use a gun even on singles, and I'll set them up to where I do have to move and swing even when I'm throwing singles. And I throw more singles than I throw anything. I mean, I throw multiple birds, but you got to be able to shuck the gun and the dog move with you. But I would say 60 to 70% of the time when I'm training, I am throwing singles. I may turn them into a memory bird by running a poison bird or doing something, but when I'm pointing and going into space, when that dog's looking where I want them to look, I'll say mark. I'll talk to them. We're allowed to talk to them at the Grand. So I'll say mark. That's the sign that you are looking where I want you to look. You stay right there until you see the bird. And I stay right there with them.
Yeah, and I noticed that when we did pre-Grand training together, I sat there for a while and tried to figure out why you were doing that. But it was just to give the listeners, like, there was times where I think you were sitting there for like 15 to 30 seconds.
I don't want those dogs swinging their head. They look where I want them to look until I tell them to. And if we've been doing, if we did a double the day before, we did a triple, and now we're doing a couple of days of singles, I don't want them pulling off. And I've got dogs that, let's just say it's a short bird. They're cocky, man. They see that bird. Okay, that's fine. I got that one over there. I'm looking for the next bird. No, we're going to look until I say it's time to move and look. And there's the sign for them to move and look is when I move the gun.
So, do you shuck the gun too on your move, or?
I shuck when I shoot. I try to eliminate the sound of the shuck altogether. And I've done that probably the last 2 or 3 years. And who I saw do it was Clark.
Yeah.
So I'll give Clark credit for that. I didn't know why he did it. I know why I do it now. I did it because I had dogs that were, when I shuck the gun and they hear that, they get happy feet and they move a little bit. I want to minimize their movement. So if I can eliminate that trigger, I do. And I can usually get the shuck in there with the same pop of the popper, and you never hear the shuck.
That's good. I do think that's the way why he does it. The other reason that I do it, as I do it the same way, is that I reload the next popper while I'm moving. So not only is hey, like, you don't move while we're not moving and it's silent here, but as soon as you hear that shuck of the gun going forward, because I only do a half. Like I shoot in half. I don't know, is that what you meant, or do you do the whole cycle?
I try to do the whole cycle, but it's not.
Oh, okay.
It's not perfect all the time. It kind of depends on how the birds are coming out and how I feel the dog is beside me, who's beside me. But
yeah. So I do a half shuck. So I shoot and shuck, and so they don't hear that. But then when I swing, I load the next popper in, and that's their signal. Like, okay, now you're looking off.
Right.
So I don't say anything in the moment of like, hey, you can't head swing. It's just, if I'm pointing you in a direction, that's where you look.
Right.
But I use the next cue is that. So it doesn't matter which way you do it, as long as you're consistent with it and the dog knows what that means. That's important. So I guess like the summary of point number 2 of make sure your dog's swinging good with a gun is making sure that they're doing 2 things. They're moving with you. They're following your gun, and then they're not getting all weird and looking around. Like, they're just focusing in that general area of where looking down your gun barrel. You said something that I want to spend a little bit of time on too, is how you do it, how you practice swinging when you're throwing singles.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a bunch of ways that we do it. I'll say one, and if there's another one, just add it in. But what we
Mm-hmm.
do a lot of is if we have two people, like pre-grand training, typically we have 3 to 4 other people that are helping.
Right.
So we'll have somebody just stand up at one hide that they're not getting a bird from yet. We'll point the gun at that person, and then we'll do whatever that action is. So then I'll load the primer and swing, and then when they're looking, then the winger launches. So I'm giving them something that they think that is going to throw a bird, because that's how it happens in training.
Mm-hmm.
That person's standing there, and then we're swinging off and working on it. So you're getting head swinging to the bird. You're getting them to swing with you to the bird, not head swinging, and then you're going through the whole
Right.
routines. So that's one thing that we do a lot of in singles.
I don't always have that many people when I'm doing that. It's usually just me and another guy when we're training, and then there's occasionally 2 or 3 other people. So it's not always somebody standing up at the hide. It's just me starting with them looking out in the direction that I want them to be. If I want to pull them to the right, I'll start with them looking to the left and just pull to the right. And when they look where I want them to look, I still give them the mark cue. Just because it can get chaotic when you're at the grand, and you should be. I know we're all supposed to follow the arc and shoot the bird at the top of the arc. I'm all for all that, but the bird's dead. I can point my gun in the general direction and have a good idea. I'm watching my dog. I want to know if my dog is looking where it's supposed to look. I want to know if they see the bird. They give me the cue that they give me. Some of them have poker faces. I get it, and you don't know. But most dogs have a cue that you can, okay, they saw that bird. We're good there. We got to pay attention to our teammate down beside us so we can help them the best we can with whatever situation arises, whether they see it or didn't see it.
Yeah. So the thing I'll add to that too is, as amateurs, typically we're not going to the line multiple times. So we got to remember where those birds are ahead of our dog running it, and kind of trust that those birds are going to be where they're going to be placed when you run the test. Because the pro gets a couple shots of looking at where that bird's exactly falling. So take your time, get in a good spot during the briefing, during the test briefing, and really figure out like what blade of grass that bird is at, because you never know when you're gonna have to do a no-see bird, and you're gonna have to like put them slightly downwind, or if you got a handle to a bird, you better know where that bird is, or you're going to be in trouble. So, sometimes the gallery isn't a great spot. So make sure that during that briefing time, you're making sure that you're really figuring out where that bird is falling exactly. And if it's day 2, or more or less, if it's day 3 or 4, you better look which way is highway to heaven and highway to hell.
Right.
And identify that really quickly. And what I mean by that is, there is going to be paths by that point that you get to day 3 or day 4. A lot of times there's the path that leads to the bird, and then there's a path that leads to the danger area. So just make sure that you know which one you're really sending that dog on.
No, you need an initial game plan before you even shoot those marks on where you're going to be, where you think you're going to be sending your dog with your initial line. All right. You're not locked down on your marks. I get it. When we run our blind, the dog's sitting right in front of that bucket usually, but you got some leeway for your initial line. Work the line. I feel like initial line is very, very important, and I'm working it as hard as I can to help that dog out.
And what I think I'm reading into is, if there's a highway to heaven and a highway to hell, get in a way that you can position that dog that it's much easier to pick the right path to that bird.
Absolutely.
And if you guys haven't ran a grand and you're just going to go visit, make sure that if it's day 3 or day 4, go stand at the line and look, and you'll see that there are paths that have been developed by the dogs just running through. There's no way to prevent it. It's just going to happen, and just hope that your dog takes the right one. All right. That was gun swings. I think we got off on a little bit of tangents, but I think they're good. They were good. All right. So this one, number 3, this one was mine. Getting more casts than normal. there is absolute, like, we're not running a field trial here where you're trying to get 2 or 3 casts to that bird. I'll never forget my second grand was a spring grand, and there was this blind that was eating people up, and uh, it was I think it was like a 15-minute blind. It was swimming water 3/4 of the way, and then it turned into running water down the shore with a little tiny like creek that they had to go over the creek at the end of the inland of this creek to get to the bird. And it was just, I watched dog after dog just get eaten alive. And Jimmy Rogers ran before us. He said, "Don't be left, don't be right, and don't get deep." And I was like, okay. And so like I didn't let Winter get like 2 feet offline. I think I blew 20 whistles, and it didn't matter. I mean, they don't care how many whistles you
No.
blow. They don't. And I remember thinking like that was one of my proudest moments at the Grand, because she didn't give me one cash refusal with 20 whistles. I was like, we're going to be
Hard to
okay.
do.
I'm like, we're going to be okay. But my point is that you're not trying to get this precise cast. What you're trying to do is get a cast towards the blind, but most importantly, at least back towards the line to the blind.
Correct.
And that, I think, is, so what I mean by this is, if you're in training and your dog gives you a cast and you're like, that'll get them to the bird. Well, if you're training, I would stop them, give them whatever, not, you don't have to be an e-collar correction, but whatever correction that is, like you make them sit it out, or you recall them a little bit, and you demand more angle. And I want my dogs in a state of mind of more angle when I go to the Grand, because with it being such an organic test, we as humans can't exactly see all the suction factors as clearly as we could if it was a tech water pond. And there's times where I'm like, I watch dog after dog get into this section, and I'm like, well, my dog's not going to do that. And then they do, so make sure that you're, even though you might not know where that suction factor is, or you don't understand that why that suction factor is so strong, that you can really practice getting that cast out of that area. And to me, that's making sure that my dogs are giving me more angle than I would probably the rest of the season.
I would also say, I mean, know when you're training and running blinds, know where the suction and problems are, and put your dogs in there and cast them out of there. I mean, it's not all. I mean, you're right when you're talking about more angle for sure, but it's more about casting them out of trouble, casting in a place that they do have a lot of suction, whether it's going back behind a point or through that piece of cover, or over that log, whatever it is. I'm not trying to line that blind when I'm training. I mean, there's dogs that I will tell my training group, if I let that dog line a blind, chastise me, hit me with a hitting stick. All right. Because we're training right now. We're not trying to win. We're trying to win tomorrow. We're trying to pass the Grand. And you got to have the control that Chris is talking about. And in order to do that, you got to cast your dogs where they don't want to go.
Absolutely. Very good. All right. Number 4, be comfortable hunting in flooded organic vegetation. And there's a lot of different ways of that, but I'll let Jeremy kind of talk about that one.
So I don't throw, when I'm training, throughout the year, I'm not always throwing feathers in water, but month and a half, 2 months out, I'll start throwing birds in water. And I want my dogs to be comfortable hunting in water, not just running a line and going to smell for a bird. I want to put it in a spot where they're going to have to dig it out. They're going to have to hunt. They're going to be comfortable swimming around in a hunt area and finding the bird, ignoring the log, ignoring the rock or the lily pad, and succumbing to trying to find the bird in water and not just up on land.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And I think to add on to this, like most of the time when I'm training, I either, you've heard this before, I'm sure people have heard this. Make the bird either hard to get to and easy to find, or easy to get to and hard to find. And I find myself breaking that rule more before the grand. Not with every mark, maybe 1 out of every 6 marks, but I'm making that both because I want that mental fortitude to be like, all right, I'm not just going to run blindly through this hard to get to factor that I
Mhm.
think we so often do in maybe in the field trial SRS game where we're like, it's all about going straight and holding that straight line. But so often, like these birds are also placed in a hard spot that if you don't mark the bird and proceed directly to it, you're going to have trouble at the grand. You're going to have that dog that just runs forever. So I like to at this point, and I'm not talking about great distances here. I'm talking about 60 to 80 yards, but making that bird hard to get to where they maybe got to go over a point, and but then also the bird is probably not covered up, but in some vegetation that when they get there, they're going to have to be comfortable to kind of swim in a circle and look for that
Definitely.
bird that it's not obvious where it is.
Right. No, and at the Grand, they're not. That's usually out in the open. I mean, we're talking about all this stuff, but it's usually out in the open if the dog gets there. They just got to be comfortable to stay in there and swim or run in running water and find that bird.
Yep.
Go inside, please.
Is that my buddy Julian?
Yes, and his sister.
Tell Julian I'm going to send him an editing bill because last time he interrupted my
All right,
podcast with Clark.
Clark. Yeah.
No, I'm just messing with him. He's a good little guy. I like
No,
him.
he's an awesome little guy. He's usually with me wherever I'm going for a test.
Yep. All right, number 5, hard to see birds.
Yeah, unfortunately, that happens more often than not at the Grand.
Yep.
So that's
And I don't.
that's why we practice on gun swinging and looking where that gun is
Yep.
pointed.
So this is point number 5 and point number 7, and they're going to go together. I'm going to combine them, so we're going to get out of order and see how my math is to get us back here. But
Okay.
I'm both throwing hard to see birds where they might be against a dark background, or trying to think of another way. It's pretty much dark backgrounds is the main thing.
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
or a bird that I just would never throw that way in training. Oftentimes when I'm pre-grand training, I'll look at a field and I'll be like, "Ooh, I throw a mark there, and I put all those in my head, and then I'd be like, "Well, I wouldn't throw one there," and I would set it up there and throw it there because
Right.
that happens to me all the time. Where I don't think a bird should be is where they put it.
Well, yeah, and our dogs get used to what we're picking out. I mean, we're trained as well. We're trying to put birds in tough spots, and sometimes we make them go to the tough spots, and it's the easy bird that gets us in trouble. So, sure.
Yep. So the hard to see bird, make sure you're throwing a lot of those. And what I do is I try to limit, unless I'm trying to do the gun swing drill or the gun swinging training, is I try not to use hides. I really try to go to grounds that I can use organic features that aren't,
Yep.
that aren't
Trees,
obvious.
hay bales, bushes, things like that, because that's what it's
Yep.
going to be at the Grand. We're not pointing at hides. All right.
Yeah, and most of the time, every grand I've ran now, there's been hay bales. And if your dog doesn't see a lot of hay bales, I would try to find a place that you can go and see hay bales because it's really hard to reproduce that. But that is something that they will see. So making those hard to find hides, maybe that's a way better way to title that one. Practice with hard to find hides. And the other thing is if you have your own property, which just might be like 5 people, Dan and Tyler did something that's really cool. Is they went and they cut up a ton of buckbrush and they tied it all up, and so it literally looks like grand hides out there.
Mm-hmm.
And they tied them all up, and they take their 4-wheeler out there, and they got skis on the bottom of it, and they just pull them around their fields.
Perfect. That's
So
perfect.
if you can go to that level, have at it and and go do that. So, like I
I will
said,
say this though.
go
I
ahead.
don't like. I'm not. I will definitely throw birds without sky and things like that. But when I'm training, I rarely, leading up to the grand, throw a bird that I'm intentionally not wanting my dogs to see.
Oh yeah, yeah,
I am not doing that. Um, we'll flag a bird even if it's a dark background, if it's a big bird and it's hard to to pick out, and I just don't want that battle. I'm not saying I don't do no CM marks. I do, but I'm not doing much of it leading up to the grand. Me personally,
yeah. Good point. Definitely. I'm not ever trying to set up a bird that I don't think my dog can see.
yeah,
I'm going in it with thinking they can see it, and then I'm making a judgment call whether I'm going to treat that as a no see bird, because I do train a little bit more on it than it sounds like you do.
yeah,
But I would do it every, like, maybe 1 out of 20 birds. So if I notice like in 2 sessions that I have to rethrow a bird because the dog didn't see it, I'm gonna make sure that maybe I change the way I think those birds are being seen. Because there's if a dog can't see it, they can't mark it.
right,
That still plays true here. I'm just making sure that it's not coming out of an obvious place. Is probably a better way to say it. Like, put it
yeah,
in a place that they wouldn't expect the bird to come from, and but still make it so that you believe that they'll see it.
or where they don't want to look
Yeah.
too.
Yep. That's a good one. Where they don't want to look. That got me last year. I was like, I never would have thrown that one. Crap. That's the worst when that happens. And then it's windy. They can't hear it. They can't hear the wingers. So
Right,
you're just like, that's
right.
it. And that's the first one that I had to handle a mark on.
Won't be the last.
At least it was the last bird of the grand. So if it was the first, I'd probably feel different about it.
Been
I was
there,
more,
done that, and
I was
walked
more,
through though.
yeah, I was more disappointed than I was, scared at that point. All right. So number 7, we're gonna come back to number 6, but number 7 was the no-see bird, and I'm not gonna get into a ton of that because Tyler Brenner and I did an entire episode on this on episode 7. So if you want to hear kind of how we do it, go check out episode 7. I think it's called like Chicken Talk and No-See Birds or something. It was a great name because if you
And they
listen
do,
to it,
and that you guys do a good job of it. I mean, I need to be stronger in that game. I'm not, or in that portion of my training, honestly. And I talked to Tyler before you guys did that a little bit at that Wisconsin SRS, and I liked what he had to say. So,
yep, it's good. It works. I think they developed that, and I did it 1 year, and I don't work on it anymore unless I,
right.
it's one of those things that you teach it and then you don't do it unless you need it.
Yep.
It's just a confidence deal, really. All right, number 6 is upland.
Yeah.
So I made the mistake. I've talked about this many times on the podcast that the first grand I did not do any upland with winter, and it was a fiasco. We ended up. It's a good thing that Dan owns a hunting preserve, and his wife drove me a million chuckers, so it worked out good. But don't do that. Do as I say, not as I do, and make sure you're prepared for the upland.
Yeah. I mean, there's parts of my training that bleed over into the upland. And I will do typically one day dedicated to upland training, a month and a half out from the grant, where we're using live birds going through our full grand like scenario. But some of the things that I do that bleed over into that are I make my dogs sit on a diversion. I do that because of upland training and also because I want more control on the diversion at the grand. I actually lost a dog because he pointed out and gave me 2 cast refusals, because a lot of times at the grand the dog doesn't see the diversion, so then you got to handle it, handle the dog to it, and handling in hunt mode is not fun most of the time. unless you practice for it. So there's a lot of times that I am sitting the dogs, and I know this is another thing we were going to talk about, and I'm going to go right into it right now.
That's all right. Number 10 is control on the diversion.
Yeah, and then I will actually sit the dog in training on the diversion, and I will handle them away from that bird to make sure that I can handle a dog, number one, on a mark if I need to, without actually training to handle on a mark, and also to have control if that situation arises at the grand and they don't see the diversion, and I'll be able to handle them the way they should be without getting dinged for it. Because they're judging your cast, whether you're handling on a mark, handling on a diversion, or handling on a blind. It's all getting looked at and scrutinized.
That's good. I didn't think about that, but you have a dog that's in a marking mentality, and now you're choosing to work on handling, but you're not handling on a mark.
Yeah,
that's good. I never thought about it that way. Makes a lot of sense. Do you ever, like, when you cast them away from it when you're just teaching them at the beginning? Do you cast them away from it, make them sit, and then throw them a bird, like as a reward, or is it just like totally about control?
It's totally about control, but I don't disagree with that thought. I think that's good to do that.
I was just curious.
No,
and it goes like to discipline cast. I don't know what. Do you call it discipline casting when like the end of your T or your double T, mod T, whatever you're doing? Do you do a lot of casting with the bumper in their mouth?
Yep. Just handling bumper and mouth. That's all I call it.
Yeah. Dan calls it discipline casting, and I thought that was a word, and I've never heard anybody else use it. So
no,
I think he just made that up.
Handling bumper and mouth is what I do.
Well, maybe people will start adopting it, so it's easier to talk about.
Yeah.
But anyway, I do a ton of that. Like that's what I'm doing with Clark's dog Fang right now. Is I'm doing all the discipline casting, and it's always funny because like the first time you do it, they're like, "What?
Yep.
You want me to do what?"
Right.
And you just keep begging them, and then all of a sudden they do it once, and you're like, "Good dog!" And then all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, I'll go anywhere for you, sir." Ding 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 ding. At least that's the way it's been for me. But I'm sure it's not that way for every dog. But it's been fun to relive that again. And be like the aha. It's like such a quick aha moment for them.
Yep.
It's great. So if you're not doing that, do a few casting with bumpers in their mouth, not your mouth. If you can do it with your mouth, then
video
whatever.
it, send it in.
Yeah, that'll go good on the Instagram. All right, number 8, marks and blinds in cover strips. I think this is one that can really be overlooked. I think that you got to find a place that there's cover strips, and I mean like I've been to some grands that it looks like they're ready to play chess or checkers on that sucker, man. It's just like big old mode strips where so either clover or like some sort of CRP set aside that's just mowed all one direction. Like, I don't know, like every mode strip of maybe 10 yards and then cover for 20, then another mode strip for 10. And it just goes all the way across the field that way. And then they say, hey, you know what? Let's go the other way across it too. That's really nice. So dogs that are not used to that's not something that genetically they're just naturally going to do. You have to get them comfortable with that, both from a marking perspective where they're in control, and then from a blind perspective where you're casting in and out of that. And drag back scent is a huge part of that. Mm-hmm. That's a huge part of that. So cover strips, I don't know if there's anything more to talk about with that. I mean, you got anything to add, or just find something to do it?
Right, and you got to be using feathers at that point in time. I know a lot of us will use ATVs or bumpers and things like that, and there's times that I am only using those types of things. But the only way to replicate that is to be throwing birds. So you gotta be throwing birds before the grant.
Because if you make it to day 4, you got 4 days of like 80 to 100 dogs going through there.
Mm-hmm.
That same lane, there's just scent everywhere at that point. So you got to have a dog that's comfortable with that and does that. And there's a video that I have in my course about how I teach drag back when I don't get to train with a lot of other dogs and people, and it doesn't involve putting the bird in your mouth. So, all right, number 9, the last one, because we already did number 10, blinds over old falls. That was yours, so I'm gonna let you talk through that one a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the dog's got to be comfortable handling through cold scent. And one big way I do it, I feel like, Steve and I both do this. Steve Eric will pick a short mark, the meanest short mark we can find, and then we'll have a blind going through that fall of that mark. But when we go to run it, I mean, we'll obviously scent up the area for the first few dogs, plucking some feathers and dragging some ducks around in that area. And then we'll come up and we'll just flat out run a cold blind. So come up, run a cold blind through that fall area, which will help your dogs go through cold scent and handle through that. And then also it's going to help them. It's going to help them concentrate on the short bird, because they just got rewarded going through that fall area and picking up a blind beyond that mark. And we'll make that a memory mark, whether it's a double or a delayed triple or something like that. And it's time to use your cue for your short bird, whatever that is, and really work on that, because the dog, like I said, was rewarded for a bird beyond that area. And it's easier for them to overrun it. They're more enticed to overrun it when you have it set up that way.
Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, I got a bonus tip that I've been saving. And then if you got anything else, Jeremy, we can add it. But if not, we can wrap this one up. This was a good one. This was quick but chock full of some really good stuff. All right, bonus tip. Don't forget that you have the ability to recall on a blind for any reason. And if you need to use it, don't be afraid to use it. You can call a dog in to a reasonable amount. So I'll set this up by talking about the counter. My friend is getting ready for the Master National, and I saw him training, and we were training together, and he was running a blind, and he kept stopping the dog and recalling the dog when the dog gave him a cast refusal. And I said,
Yep.
Stop. Don't do that. You're running 8KC. You can't do that. Just tweet, give him a correction, give him the cast. If he does it again, tweet, Nick, correction, because you have to train differently for the types of events you're going to run. But my point is at the Grand, you can recall if you need to break that dog's momentum. The judges perhaps will talk about it in the briefing, but you can. And to me, that has saved my butt many, many times running finish tests, where the dog was just absolutely convinced that they needed to go left, and they needed to go right, and they won it. And it doesn't matter what level the dog is. Tweet, bring them back in a little bit, break that momentum, and get your cast. They will say you can run a blind, you can cast towards the blind, towards the line of the blind, or you can bring a dog towards you. They'll say that, and that is something that can save your butt. So keep that in the back of your mind. If you can't do it excessively, but you can do it enough that you can break that momentum. And here's another thing. If you have to handle on a mark and your dog is well deep of the mark, don't try to give an over. Okay? Call your dog in much further than that mark actually is, because your chances of getting it over are very slim. But your chances of getting an angle back are much higher. So set yourself up. So if you have to handle on a mark, just start. The first thing I do is I break down that dog's momentum. I bring them in, and then I start handling. So that's my bonus tip. You got any bonus tips?
I would just say know your dog and know its weaknesses and its strengths, and make sure you're working on the weaknesses 2 months, month before. And every time you go to the line, you are looking for whatever that weakness is to arise, or ways that you can make it arise so that you can help the dog through it, or teach the dog not to do it. Every dog is different, and good dog sense and knowing that animal is going to make you more successful when you're going to the line with them. Whether it's a strong marker or a dog that doesn't like to handle, or a dog that you feel like is going to creep, you need to be very intentional on setting up situations to where you can make corrections for whatever that issue is leading up to the Grand.
Good stuff. Well, Jeremy, appreciate you being on the podcast, man. It was
No,
fun.
thanks for having me.
It's going to be, I think people are going to really like it and they're going to learn a lot. So that's the whole point. So thank you again, sir.
Thank you, Chris.